This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome back. Sorry, I just had to match the GoToMeeting lady. Okay, so let's get started. Yeah, what you're seeing here, I did a couple of quick sketches before the class started, just breaking down different hand movements at different angles, some studies from different artists. We're going to start by taking a look at the 3D model of the hand. And I want to break it down into simple forms. Then we'll make it even easier. Cool. The immediate laugh that no one will understand in the VOD. Oh yeah. Well, that's too bad. They should have showed up to class that they might not have known about before. Okay, so for me when I'm drawing hands, the easiest way to rationalize it is I think about it as if it was a mitten. For me, I find that super helpful. I'm just going to draw shapes first. We'll go into forms, and then we'll do our nice loose scribbly drawings. Okay, so I imagine sort of like, I guess this shape is a pentagon. So I imagine a pentagonal shape with a little mitten hand there. So imagine just putting on mittens, essentially. For the finger shapes, we're going to keep it really simple at first before we start breaking it down into forms, but just imagine a fan, essentially just the fingers fanning out. We're going to keep it real simple. Main thing here is this pentagonal shape for the hands. Fan shape for the fingers. And this little slot here for the thumb. We'll go into the anatomy and stuff as well, so this makes a little bit more sense. One of the big things that I think makes hand drawings look much better is prioritizing the thumb side. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So if we imagine this as our wrist here, there's a lot more volume towards the thumb side. So I almost imagine this little Z shape here when I'm drawing a hand. We're going to see this motif happen pretty much all over the hands, is this staggering effect of the gesture there. I didn't emphasize it as much here on my initial shape outline, just because I'm going over a real life hand and not using, I'm not stylizing just yet. Cool. So we're not going to worry too much about the individual fingers just yet, but you can see even if once I start adding in fingers, we've got a pretty decent base model here for the hands. It's not the worst thing. It's not the worst base model for hands. Cool. It's kind of the same from the front, except now since we're looking at it in the reverse, obviously we've got to prioritize or have that at the wrist, that Z shape is going towards the thumb. So now that has reversed itself. And take note of a few things that I'm doing here. I'm not just drawing the upper part of the palm. I'm not just drawing this pentagon shape as a flat line straight across. There are styles that do that. I'm personally not doing that. I'm trying to incorporate a little bit of that curvature in the top of in the hand there. Cool. So we'll draw that off to the side as well. So I'm just starting with that pentagon. And if I'm doing a rough pass, I might even draw it in like this. Really depends. I will apply a lot more of the measures or the techniques that we talked about in the previous lessons, you know, doing a little bit more scribbling, that kind of stuff. But at least for early visualization, I find this to be a really good way to go about it. Okay, another thing that I want to address here that I think is super important is the gesture of the fingers always leads back to the center. It's not, I mean, it's not exactly that way in real life, but I find that if you exaggerate this, it looks so much cooler. So if you, for example, the pinky, I'm going to make it so that the gesture leads back into the center. And the index finger, same sort of deal where it's leading back into the center. Cool. As far as the lines that I'm going to indicate when I'm drawing the hand, in this case, if we're looking at the palm, I'm going to indicate a line here for this top muscly bit. Actually, let me break it down into 3 sections, and then we can decide what lines we want to use from there. So I've got this shape up here that basically just forms a curve that wraps up and over. And anytime you bring your fingers down and start to, you know, bring your fingers closer to your palm, you're going to see a crease that gets bigger there. We've got the hypothenar eminence, which is the muscle that controls the pinky. Don't worry about the names, just know that there's a taller, thinner mass here and a much wider thenar eminence here that controls a lot of the movement of the thumb. So when I'm drawing the palm side, it's really those 3 structures that I'm thinking about. And if I remembered my anatomy better, I would know the name of this. We're just going to call that palm palm mass. That's anatomy, right? And then the thenar. Don't worry too much about it. But you can use those ideas to indicate shapes on the palm. Again, those masses, we're going to try to draw our lines where the shadows would be. So I'm going to use the underside. Maybe I'll indicate the hypothenar eminence. I don't always. I will prioritize the thenar eminence, the one that goes over to the thumb. Cool. What about the back of the hand? Get out of here. All right. Can't see it too well under this lighting condition, but we see that same. Well, we see a little bit of the thenar eminence, and then there's, I think it's the dorsal interosseous muscle. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the names so much. But it kind of reflects the same pattern from the underside, where we're seeing muscly bits that control the movement of the fingers. In this case, they pull the fingers closer together. And then that's going to be segmented by chunks of bone and tendon that lead back towards the wrist. How does this show up when we're drawing it? Well, occasionally you'll want to indicate these knuckled points, and then occasionally I'll draw, you know, some lines to indicate the tendons that are going down towards the wrist. We'll get to that when we start actually drawing hands. But that's sort of the big thing. We want to pay attention to, we want to understand a little bit of that, of what's going on underneath, just because it helps us dictate what sort of lines we're going to be doing on the surface. But yeah, we'll get to that in just a moment. What else do we have here? Some things that we don't really notice, but that you can't really see too well on the surface here, but I'll tend to use are, there's a tendon that runs from the thumb down into the wrist, and it overlaps the tendons of the flexor muscles that are underneath on the forearm. So a lot of times you'll see that I tend to use this overlapping line work here. All right, again, the anatomy, what are we using it for? We're using it to dictate what types of lines we're going to use. And it helps us, dictate what types of lines are going to go on the interior. So that's a big one right there. The other thing we'll see on the wrist is, and it's kind of hard to see here, but you can, on the surface anatomy, you can see the ulnar bone, and you can use that as a little landmark when you're drawing the wrist. Like, right there. Use that sort of as a landmark to indicate the junction between the wrist and the hand. All right. Cool. So let's talk about the forms of the hand, how I break this down in three-dimensional space. So let me pull up this because I like to draw over it. This is my my workaround for, oh shit, my workaround for this. Sick, right? Super cool. Awesome. All right, let's get a good angle on this. This is dizzying. Okay. 1 second. Let me get Epic Pen out here. Okay, surprise, surprise, that when we're thinking about the hands, it can be incredibly useful to think about it in volumes. You're going to notice this trend, or you probably have noticed this trend throughout most of these things here. For now, I'm going to simplify the wrist to just a box for a second. All right. So yeah, I found this super helpful for thinking about it, because there's a drop at the wrist that we can, if we can understand how these forms pivot around each other, it kind of makes it easier to understand in 3D. So this is going to be our wrist, forearm. These are the wrist bones. And this will be our hand. Draw this at a few different angles. And the hand is going to be pivoting around this wrist like a pivot joint. Can do this at a couple of different angles to get a good sense of that. And I'll start to draw in some finger shapes just so that makes sense. Right, so just like with everything else, having these forms to visualize how things are going to fit in 3D space, really useful for understanding, just how it's going to articulate. Okay. Now, because as we've seen also, using boxes, not the greatest way to get good shapes. Are we having a break today? Yes, we are going to have a break at 3:30. Boxes, not the best way to visualize shapes. So what I want you to do is take our box form and we want to blend it together with that pentagonal shape that we were talking about before. I'm going to add a little bit of curvature. Right? The more comfortable we get blending shapes and forms together, the easier drawing is going to get. All right, we've got our center line there. You can imagine this almost like, try to think of this like a little door hinge, and the hand can pivot up and down from that door hinge. And we've got all these little finger slots here. Look at that. Those beautiful volumes. Cool. All right, so let's look at the 3D model, and we're gonna draw those forms on them. Super useful to understand this when the hand is in perspective, or especially if the hand's foreshortening. It's going to be really confusing to not understand the forms. Oh my God, they're horrifying. Yeah, it is a little bit horrifying. It is quite horrifying. All right, so essentially all I'm doing here is taking this boxy form, I'm curving it and adding a little bit of a pentagonal shape to it. I can draw that out in a second. And the more comfortable you get with all of these forms, the more organic and naturalistic they can be. Part of the reason why I start out with boxes is because it can be confusing to go from a box to something that's a little bit more organic and still maintain the volume in that. But if you want, use cylinders, all that kind of thing to make drawing this easier. All right, instead of using a rectangular prism for the forearm, you can use cylinders. Whichever way you want to break that down. I know some people have a harder time with cylinders and organic shapes. All right, let's do a few more. It's a good way to think about mechanical arms as well. I don't know why, if you want to do some mech design, right, you can think about making those forms blockier. And I'm kind of breaking that down into a hinge joint. Figures for animation mechs. Yeah, there you go. That'll be the third one. All right, cool. So that's kind of the idea of how I'm mapping out that mass of the palm. If this sort of shape, if that shape is confusing the way I'm breaking that down, you can start with a rectangular prism that gives you the perspective and then cut away at that. Okay, cool. Let's talk about adding in fingers. Um, for the most part, like if I'm drawing a character, I kind of have default shapes that I'll go to. And I'll talk about what shapes I use in just a little bit. But before I just want to keep emphasizing on the structure. I kind of, especially when the fingers are coming at me, I tend to rationalize them as just cylindrical forms, but forms that sort of are modified. So in this case, think of each of these fingers emerging from the hand there as cylinders. And it's important to know those ellipses because I don't know, let's say a character's wearing a ring, or if you have like we were talking about a mechanized character or something, you're going to need to be able to figure out what each ellipse degree is going to be. And then again, the more comfortable we get with this, we can start to add a little bit of shape design. But in this case, that thumb is headed away from us, so we use an ellipse that goes away. All right. I see you guys are brainstorming the next class. Love to see it. Love to see it. Cool. All right, let's talk about drawing the hands a little bit more intuitively now. Figure drawing for animation 7. I don't know what I'm teaching you anymore. God damn it. It's what happens. It's what happens on the last day of class. I wish this would turn into a side view, but you know what? I'll just use a different reference.
Would you be able to bring up your last sketch? I just missed clipping it.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. Appreciate
No
it.
problem. Let me get the hand in place too. I gotta go around the other way. Hold on.
No worries. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. There we go.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, I think those types of transformations are super useful when, or understanding those forms is really useful for a situation like this, where the hand is coming directly at you. So in this case, I would break it down. Let's try to get a color that works. Like this, where we're seeing a lot of the front plane of the palm. And all those fingers are headed directly at us, except for the thumb. Cool. But this wouldn't be our class if we just broke everything down into forms, because that's not what we want to do. I want us to also keep in mind that it's very important to scribble, be loose, and enjoy yourselves when drawing. So just like we were doing before with all our figures, when I'm sketching, I'm generally keeping it super loose. You can see I'm kind of indicating some of those shapes that we use for those underlying forms. But there's some sort of hybrid between a form breakdown where you can see I'm using the cylindrical form of the arm. And then I'm going to use shapes for the fingers just to make it super easy. And that's kind of how drawing goes, right? We learn all these different techniques and you kind of just start to incorporate them in any way that feels comfortable to you. So what I kind of want to urge everybody to do when we're drawing, try to figure out these forms and then, go back, loosely sketch them, try drawing things in multiple different ways. So let's go about that. We're going to do a couple of breakdowns from reference. We're going to first break it down into forms, and we'll do some sketches of them. And as I'm sketching them, I'll talk about where I'm indicating my lines, why I'm indicating my lines the way I'm doing it, and so on. Let's get all that stuff out of the way. All right, so I'm going to start with the second one in that row there. Okay, so the forearm is going up to the right. So I'm imagining this as a cylinder with the minor axis going up and to the right. Then the back of the hand here, again, we can break down into either, actually, let's start with just a rectangular form. Right, we can see we have a big angle change there at the wrist, right? It goes up and then it flattens out. Up and then flattens out. Awesome. and make things even easier, we'll just look at the fingers as if they're a flat plane as well. This is the super duper low poly model. Cool. All right, but that's not, that's not the end of everything. So let's add some curvature to that form, add a little bit more dynamics. So I'm going to taper the wrist. Start with a shape that's a little bit more reflective of what I'm seeing there. So I'm using that curved pentagonal shape. Now for the fingers, I will generally think of them as shapes whenever I'm drawing them and, just using my own style. I tend to think of them as Z shapes, and I'll break it down into, rather than breaking it down into 3 distinct joints, I find that it's easier to break it down into just 2. I mean, obviously you're simplifying the number of details, makes it easier. And it tends to look better if you simplify it just into 2 shapes. If we view that in perspective, right, we can take that Z shape and then apply volume to it. Looks a little something like this, and I can even allow that joint line to overlap into the silhouette. I'm not talking too much about the anatomy underneath here, but the backside of the fingers is mostly bony. You can look at your own hands because y'all most likely have hands, I'm assuming. And you can see the back of the hands is super bony, and then the underside's a little bit rounder and more soft. So I'm generally going to use more curved shapes underneath there. Another way we can think about fingers, if you want to go real form-based about it, look at that. Really, really simple building blocks, and then I'm just rounding out the bottom shapes. So I'm carving away at those forms. And one thing we'll see later when we're drawing some fingers from reference, we'll find that when we can block hands into planes, sometimes it actually looks way nicer. So that will come in handy. I'll look at a bunch of different artists that do that. I tend to exaggerate that Z shape, right? Even though when we're looking at the reference, that doesn't happen that much, right? Happens a little bit, but I like to exaggerate that motif, and you'll see people exaggerate that motif all the time because it just feels super gestural. Same on the thumb. So I'm simplifying that down into two joints and then adding or emphasizing that Z motif. Another thing that's occurring to me here as I'm drawing this is the distinctions between the fingers. So those the lines or these gaps between the fingers is distinct from the lines where the knuckles are. So we'll see it more clearly when I'm drawing a fist. Actually, let me do that now so you guys can see. Got some closed palms up here. But already just looking at the reference, you can see the knuckle occurs all the way up here, and then the gap between the fingers is much further away. The fist is a perfect example of where you'd want to use a blocky form. Makes it super easy. Right, so yeah, knuckles up here. That gap between the fingers is all the way down there. Okay. Fist here from the front view, we're only seeing a really, really slight bit of that top plane of the hand. And we've got this sort of wedge shape coming out to the side for the thumb. For all those watching the VOD, you won't be able to enjoy this wonderful chat that we've got going on today. It's great stuff, great content up there. Figure for animation 12, character designs with hydrocephalus. Great way to end off the class. All right. I've broken you guys, sorry. All right, so you can see on the, maybe a little hard to see here on the reference, but we're gonna notice the Z motif happening everywhere. So I mentioned it here in the fingers. It also happens at the wrist. We get this little Z shape. So yeah, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, that's just a little mental logic thing that I've used to help me draw hands, is just thinking about it, not just in terms of the 3D forms so that I can rotate them in space, but also those underlying shapes and little tricks that I can use. So let's draw that hand. We're going to see in part 2 of the class as well, when we talk about lighting, that being able to break the figure down or different parts down into planes like this is really, really useful for lighting, because we can kind of use that as a framework for where light would shine or wouldn't. A good example would be if the light is coming from the top, then this whole front plane would be in shadow. And so if we group those things together, it'll end up working quite well. Cool. Okay, so I'm indicating the knuckles here at the top of the silhouette. But then the gap between the fingers, I'm going to start by drawing a little diagonal line that goes in the opposite direction, and then a curved line that goes down towards the first knuckle. Right, so where the knuckle is placed on the drawing is different than where we're seeing the gap between those fingers. I'm making a point about that just because I tend to see that. I always find drawing the fist kind of hard. I kind of fucked that up. Another little thing that I am using here that I tend to see and appreciate is this motif where we get this sort of design where at the top of the finger it curves out and then back in. I'll make note of that throughout the class, with this idea where it's curving out and then back in. Is that flesh getting squeezed? Yes, you can use a little bit of squash and stretch there, right here. Maybe not that much. Yeah, anywhere where things are getting compressed, particularly in those meaty bits, the thenar and hypothenar, you can add some squashing motions. All right, cool. Let's do a few more. Glad we got all the hand puns. Always good to see. Let's have a look at this center one. Right here. All right, so I'm going to start with that curved organic form that kind of mimics the hand shape a little bit. Seeing the side plane of the hand. Here's our wrist bone. Right, treating that as though it's a pivot joint. And then there's the forearm. Right. Notice this staggering that's going on here. Right. At the wrist, there's this big drop down. Right. It's not as rigid as the way I'm showing it because you've got tendons and things that run along here and smooth that curve out. But this is a huge gesture that you want to use when you're drawing. It's really important. That drop at the wrist. Right. More Z shapes. This chat. Knuckle down. God damn. Today's going to be an interesting one. And just like with all of our previous things, if you want to go in and do really rough sketches first, feel free to go do that. I'm kind of trying to go in with my final line work. Probably a bad idea, but sometimes it's fun. So for the pinky here, I'm going to, again, use that Z shape. I'll ignore the third knuckle. Just treat this as two forms that are connected. There's a lot of meaty bits under there, right? We got the hypothenar being squeezed, and I really should just learn the name of that thing. The meaty bit underneath the fingers, whatever it's called. Actually, if you guys want to help me out and look that up, that would be kind of sick. That would be quite nice. That way, whoever's watching the VOD doesn't have to watch this and hear me call it the meaty bit for 3 hours. The squimch zone, god damn it. Forget I asked. Forget I asked. Cool. Okay, so other important things that are going on in this one. In general, it's a great idea to stagger the fingers whenever you can, right? Even if the fingers are perfectly in line with each other, try to stagger it up because then it just feels nicer. I like the sense of this wave motion between the fingers. Adductor pollicis, there we go. Thank you. Somebody did it. It's not called the squinch zone. That is great though. So yeah, anywhere we can get this sort of curved line between these. Okay, I want to talk about this one up here. Also, let me know if you guys have questions. This is the last class. Take advantage of it. I told you to ask questions and no one's turned on their microphone. It's devastating. Should I raise your hand if you have a question? You guys are making me regret teaching.
I'll ask something.
Okay. I mean, you don't have to ask a question if you don't have one.
No, I do have one which has to do with the knuckles. I always
Mhm.
break them down as like diamond shapes. I didn't know if you had a specific shape that you broke them down into to help you draw them, because I feel like when I'm drawing fists, for example, it feels like I'm just going, here's a bump, and it's not really not really structural.
Yeah. So I definitely think about them as a diamond shape. Here, I can let me draw some forms over a fist for a moment. So like when we break the fingers down into their component forms, we've got like let's see, we've got these sort of diamond shaped knuckles on the top. So that's a great way to think about it. And then the back, I try to think of flat planes that step down in these sort of Z shapes. And so at each of these points, we get a form that sticks up on top like that. You can kind of see it here, right? Let's see. So you can, if we're breaking that down, like we can think about it as just a rectangle where we've got a sort of curved form or like a curved diamond form on top. And then each of the tendons that emerges from that is a little bit of it's like a little tube that runs along the center of the finger. And so that's what you're seeing here. Now in practice, when I'm drawing that, generally what I'll do is I'll give some indication for that border where that knuckle is, and then put a little bit of a tendon line emerging from that. So it's kind of like this shape, and then a little bit of that tendon, and then I'll draw the gap between the fingers. So this whole complicated form gets simplified down to just a couple lines where they'd be in shadow. And then that tendon sort of fades into the rest of the finger because it's blended with fat and muscle and that kind of stuff. So when we're drawing that here, let's do one of these front view hands. I'll emphasize the middle and index knuckles, right? Those are going to be the strongest. Then maybe a little bit and blend that out. I've seen a lot of artists do that where they'll sort of blend out the remainder of the knuckles. And then my main focus here when I'm drawing these is that gap between the fingers, right? Because we're drawing in shadows, like we're drawing in dark lines, so we're drawing in shadows. Super useful to just use the gaps between them. Now, when I'm rendering this, we can treat these as flat planes. And so if I was going to use lighting, I would shade in each of these planes. And honestly, I like simplifying the hand, like the remainder of the fingers down in that view, rather than indicating all these individual knuckles there. But if I, for whatever reason, made a stylistic choice that I didn't like, or just a different stylistic choice, I would indicate a little bit of a shadow for where that knuckle is. But most, or a ton of artists, including people like John Singer Sargent, will just simplify that finger all into one solid plane like that. I'm a big fan of that. It's definitely my least favorite angle to draw, though, I gotta say. It's looking like shit.
That's me with front views.
Yeah. Yeah, I can get away with the fingers spread out like this, but when I'm encountering a fist, I tend to just default to like, I just get really shapely about it. And then that's kind of my solution to it. Indicate a little bit of that knuckle. All right, let's look at some of these other ones. Oh, yeah, I want to look at this one here. We'll do one more of these and then we'll talk about range of motion. And if you want, I don't think any of you want to do this necessarily, but as an exercise, you can do what we did with the head drawings last week, where you're starting by rotating those, and then, or you could use primitive forms first, and then block in the hands after that. But again, I don't know if you want to do that, but it might be to your benefit to do that. All right, so for each of these fingers, I'm going to just treat them as little rectangles. This is another way to go about it, right? I'm just treating the fingers as if they're only the back plane, almost as if I took a piece of paper and then just bent it. Looks pretty creepy, but it's another way you can think about it, right? These are all just little mental tools you can use to try to figure out how things are fitting in 3D space. Right? Then let's say our light's coming from the front in this case. You could do something like all these back facing planes are in shadow. Right, and I'll show you some examples of that. We're going to use that curved pentagonal shape. I'm keeping this in mind, how these planes shift, but I'm going to just be a little bit more shapely about it. And think about those Z shapes that I was talking about.
Hey James, quick question. Do you have any tips on like overlaps? Because like the hand, depending on the angle, there's a lot of overlapping happening. Would you rely on kind of the reference itself? Because sometimes if I rely on the reference, like it doesn't look good. So do you have any tips on that for overlaps?
Yeah. Let me fix this, and then I'll give a little explanation of what we can do here. Yeah, there's a lot going on with the fingers and the overlaps that make it a little bit challenging. So let me point out what I'm doing here. So there's a slight wedge that goes on in the hand. So let's say this is the back of the hand. The underside here is the front. There's a slight wedge that goes on like this. So we can get a little bit of overlap of the fingers and then some skin behind them that joins the fingers. So you can see I'm trying to do that a little bit where I'm allowing the finger to overlap. Let me try to point this out here. I'm drawing it where like the finger will go into the hand like this, and then there'll be overlap behind it leading into the next finger. I'll do a better demo of that. Okay, yeah, if you look at this index finger, right, I'm going to draw a continuous shape for the knuckle and then the finger, and then I'm picking up from behind it to draw a little bit of that skin from underneath, and then the subsequent finger. I don't know if that makes sense. Kind of like this. So this is our index finger. Then that shape overlaps and we pick up behind it to draw that following finger. So that's something that can help. Simplifying into shape is super valuable, right? That Z shape thing has become sort of invaluable to the way that I draw, because for the most part, when I'm visualizing it in my head, I'm really just thinking, unless the fingers are going directly at the camera, I'm really just thinking this curved form with a bunch of Z shapes coming out of it. And then I can use just a single line to play with the gesture of the fingers and then build out volume from there. Cool, cool. Yeah, let's look at this one where the fingers are coming at the screen a little bit more. More spider fingers. Yeah, it's one of the harder scenarios to do, so I'd like to look at that. And then we'll go into range of motion of the hand. Never disliked hands more than I do right now. Sorry to hear that. I did not mean to do that to you. Okay, well, if there's one takeaway that you can get from this is we can just think about the hand as a simple block. Curve that bad boy out a little bit. Yeah, I think whenever you're in a situation where it's like, oh, I just don't know what to do here. This is too difficult. I'm confused. Just think about it in shapes. Scribble, keep it loose. Don't worry too much about it. Do I tend to group the fingers for stylization? I might. So in like this example up here, I might group the ring finger and middle finger together like this, and then just draw that negative space between them. Let me do that better. Totally fucked that up. But yeah, I think, you can do things like that where you group those shapes together. And that's one you'll see a lot, the grouping of the index and middle finger. And I'll do it on this one too, because we're about to do that. And here, we're going to see we're seeing those knuckles, the tendons that run along back to the upper part of the forearm. And I'm only going to indicate a subtle bit of those, right? Just the knuckle and a little line for that tendon. I'm not going to indicate the whole thing. Again, a huge part of drawing is knowing what information to include, what not to include, and kind of working that way. It's part of the reason why I'm not sitting here going through a full anatomy lecture about the hands. Get that information on Pickup Bridgman. Yeah, so we'll group the index, or sorry, the ring finger and middle finger together. This is a perfect example of what I was talking about, right? The fingers overlap, and then there's that
Did he just freeze? He's dead.
Not again.
Oh no.
Spider
The
hands killed
spider
him.
fingers.
Oh no.
Did this happen on the feedback session?
Yeah,
Oh no.
Yeah.
we had to finish it ourselves.
Yes, that's what I was saying. Breen, just take over the class.
Priya, it's up to you now.
Hi everyone,
I don't
welcome. I am now James. Just draw your hands like spiders and you'll be good.
I don't know who started saying spider hands, but they look normal to me, and someone said spider hands, and now I cannot look at them the same ever again.
That was
No,
me.
I hated when he had like the little holes in them. I don't even have trypophobia or anything, but they just look so gross. Like the little finger
Oh.
hole.
Don't worry, Mia. You're not the only one. When I first saw it, it's like,
But if you hate that, you should check out that new game Scorn.
I was scorned, yeah.
I haven't seen it yet. I've been playing a lot of Stray lately though, and ugh,
It's a
it's
fucking
so cute.
well, it's a very different vibe from Stray, I can tell you
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I just googled it.
I'm
Alright,
genuinely
everybody.
excited for it. It
Good.
looks so cool.
We need to make a prayer circle to summon him back, so everybody hold hands.
All
My
right.
hands are really
Hold
sweaty. I
hands.
don't know.
Remember, the
ironic.
thing that brings him here is boxes, so we have to think about boxes.
We have to
Very
chant.
lots of boxes. Just banish any thought of like traditional drawing from your brain, because for some reason, anytime that gets brought up, he just crashes.
Whose feedback took him out? Was it Tim? I can't remember who did the traditional.
Yeah, yeah, it was Tim.
Yeah, it was me.
When like the
Tim,
moment
what did
Tim
you do
mentioned
this
drawing
time?
traditionally, he just gone.
Computer blew up. Oh no.
Oh, his computer blew up.
That is quite the pickle.
Oh dear. Well, this recording's gonna be hilarious to come back to.
I hope this whole thing gets uploaded.
Fucking
You
Vital
didn't
Ash
put it in the
snitching on us.
feedback,
Fucking brilliant. Are any of you guys gonna be in his next class?
I
No,
shouldn't,
unfortunately
because
not,
like
because
the pound is real weak right now compared to the dollar.
Oh
I
yeah,
probably
yeah.
will be.
I saw that.
USA. USA.
I won't be in the class.
Why not?
Some broke as shit.
Mood.
Understandable.
school started for me, so I'm busy.
Yeah, it's a rough
Yeah,
time.
fair.
Massive workload.
Fair.
I
I
definitely
wish I
won't be
could be
getting
in that
feedback
class, though.
here, alas.
All valid reasons.
Maybe the lecture was the friends we made.
Fumbling can't steal the drug money yet.
Jesus.
Damn it, Tim.
Oh god, I'm dying.
Don't die.
God damn.
We've already had one casualty, not another.
It's time to go to the other side, everyone. This is the part of the lecture.
Jesus.
It's not just the class that's ending.
It's easier to draw humans when they're see-through. That's the reason we're doing it, get it?
Just in time for Halloween as well.
Yeah, exactly.
True, we can all
Halloween-
go haunt each other.
Yeah.
Woo.
Oh, he's back. Hello.
I'm back. I made it back.
He's returned.
Hey, we missed you.
Oh,
Welcome back.
you guys
We
all start
started a
talking when I'm
prayer
gone?
circle. Yeah, we started a prayer circle, put some boxes in it, and we saw a sign from you, so we assumed you're alive.
Oh,
And hey, it
wow.
worked.
Well, I'm glad I'm back. I'm glad I'm back. All right, let me, shit, I don't know what's going on with my computer. Something's always going to happen on the last day, it seems. It seems like my computer always explodes on the last day of classes.
Oh, that's
Very frustrating.
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it happened for the last class too, for the animation
Oh.
basics.
Oh, for real? What the
Yeah. I don't know what's going on with my computer.
Well, you'll
It's like
definitely have an interesting section of your recording where you died, so
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to listening back to it. Can't wait.
Yeah, you can see how the community came together in your while you were
Wow.
gone.
Man, that makes me feel like I should just never be here. No, I get it. I get it. I should
We
just
had
leave.
to. Our glorious leader disappeared in our time of need.
Okay. Oh, so it's like a cult where when
Yes.
the leader's gone, you guys freak the fuck out. Okay. Well,
Yeah, exactly. Got
okay,
it.
I
good. We wouldn't
think
want it
before
any
you
other way.
froze, you talked about the thing between fingers.
Yeah, I felt like I was on a roll too. I was so sad. I was like,
Mm.
this is a pretty good thing I'm talking about here. I was talking a little bit about lighting. I don't know if you guys caught that. I'm gonna assume you didn't.
You
All
were
right, we'll
drawing
go.
another spider finger hand, and then you disappeared from this earth.
Damn, that's what happens. All right, let me get my canvas back in order here. Yeah, I'll point it out on here before I waste any more time. The big thing that I was trying to get across was that, you've got to find your own strategies that work. I have STEM brain, so I naturally want to break things down into planes, boxes. It helps me figure stuff out. But you can use any combination of approaches. So like with this hand that I drew, I went in and I scribbled it, right? And I know in the back of my head that when the hand is up like this, I treat it like a box that's upturned, right? And what I mean by that, I know that I'm seeing the full length of the back of the hand. I use that for lighting. So in this case, the light was coming from the front and to the right. So this whole back plane was in shadow, right? So it gives me a lot of information that I can use when I'm drawing. But as far as going and executing the drawing, I'm not just sitting there drawing a bunch of boxes out and then starting from there, because that's a really unintuitive form of drawing. It's better just to go in, have those concepts in the back of your mind, maybe simplify those forms into curved volumes, and then I'll generally just treat the fingers as shapes. And then I reverse engineer it. So I'll start with the shapes, and then I'll break the finger down into planes from there. So in this case, once it hits that first knuckle, now I'm treating that as a solid plane. And you can imagine if this was, I don't know, like a piece of paper, all these fingers that are coming out here are all in shadow. Cool. So that's really the main thing there. Don't get too bogged down by forms if that's something that's tricky to you. If it's something that helps, definitely use it. Use it as much as you need. But if you're not the type of person that that's beneficial to, go like find a more intuitive approach to perspective. Maybe just get a camera out, take photos from angles that you find difficult, and then try to draw that way. Just do that loose scribbly form of drawing, but in difficult angles. I found all those approaches, like if you just tackle it from different angles and use different methods of drawing it, it's going to be so much better. Okay. That out of the way, let's talk a bit about movement of the hand, and then yeah, we'll get to some handy questions. For the most part, this is kind of I like to use minimal details in the hands. I'll talk a bit about the shape choices that I've got going on here. So right, we can imagine all these knuckles are here leading back towards the wrist, but even though those exist there, I'm using pretty minimal, line choices there for the interior of that silhouette. The forearm, you'll notice it on all my drawings, the forearm is much rounder up towards the top here. And then I'm tapering it down a ton as we get to the wrist. right? The wrist is super bony. There's just there's just bone and tendon there. So that shape is really much stiffer and more rigid. That shape choice I kind of stole from Il-Kwang Kim, that lead designer over at Studio Mir, and I saw this thing and it broke my brain. I've talked about it a bunch of times, where he drew the leg where we got the meteor bit up top. It angles down. We've got this kind of Z thing going on. And so I'm trying to steal that a little bit, where the forearm is tapering down a lot and then almost tapering up a little bit as we get to the wrist. So that's kind of how I'm going about that. Shape-wise, anything that's a bit fleshier, meatier, more muscle, I'm using rounder forms. So you can see here at the dorsal interosseous muscles, for all you nerds out there, I'm using softer shapes. And then the back of each of these fingers, I'm using flatter shapes. And then for all this, I mentioned this earlier, curving your fingers in towards the center feels more interesting. It doesn't, your pinky does it the most pronounced in real life, but I find that if you kind of exaggerate the amount that the fingers arch back towards the center, the more interesting they are. Cool. Okay. The hand in side view, let's take a look at that. So again, I'm using interesting dynamic shapes there for the forearm. We've got the more curved shape up towards the elbow, flatter, more rectangular down towards the wrist. I'm gonna add in that a drop at the wrist, right? Like if I had my hand just go straight out, there would still be a drop at the wrist, like this. So kind of baked into the natural gesture of the hand is this Z shape. Right, and that's going to be really crucial. Well, when you're looking at it from the side view, you're going to see that drop, and the palm kind of wraps up under here. And you can see let's have the thumbo over here. Yep. Cool. All right, so that's an important gesture that I think is going to help a lot. Let's look at that from the front view. Right, from the front, we can't exactly see that drop as much, but there's still a little bit of a Z going on. Sometimes I don't know why I pick certain spots to draw the way I did. Just obviously going to overlap that one right there. Not a great call. All right. So from here, there's a few little motifs that you can see I'm doing. At the junction between the palm and the fingers, I'm doing that pentagon shape, but I'm kind of repeating that throughout here. You're going to see that at the underneath, at the bottom of the meaty bit, whatever we decided that was called. And at the wrist, I'm also going to make this triangular shape, right? Because we're seeing the bottom of that hypothenar eminence and the thenar eminence. So I'll indicate the underside of those. The squelch zone is canon now? Okay, good. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear that. All right. So yeah, big thing here. Favor that the thumb side, you can indicate this drop on the palm that we see in the side view so distinctly. You can indicate that by having a little bit of a shadow underneath those muscular bits on the hand or on the palm there. If you're going super, super detailed, you'll be able to see the tendons go into that, right? You'll see all these tendons of the carpal tunnel, and those will lead up and into the palm. All right, let's talk about movement. I think it's a really good idea anytime you're moving the hands to try to stagger it a little bit. So in the examples that I was trying to do before class here, rather than having all the fingers move at once at the same speed, I'm closing them somewhat individually. So it just looks a little bit more interesting. And maybe we should do a view from the front where the hand is closing into a fist. I think that would be good. Also, I found this a fun exercise to sit and do a quick little animation of these. Cool. All right, let's start and do a rough pass. We're going to do the hand closing into a fist. It's possible I'll fuck it up, but let's go for it. That's what we're here for. So let's start with the hand overturned. So we're seeing essentially, let me just do a quick demonstration of the form. We're going to see the hand turned down slightly. The thumb on that left side and the remainder of the fingers coming out like this. But we're going to add some more shapes, a little bit more gesture to it. Okay, pay attention to gestures of the hand as well, right? So I'm going to have the hand with the fingers kind of outstretched, but in your neutral state of holding your hand, like you can see my hand and keeping it kind of neutral, the fingers curve in. So it's not like my fingers they're not just going to look like this. All right, it's pretty difficult to do that. You can do that, but it's just not a very like neutral state of the way you'd hold your hand. We're going to have the index finger be the most extended. So the index finger is the most linear. And then as we get towards the ring and pinky fingers, those are going to curve in more and more. And I didn't get that perfect, so we'll try to make that better. It's a little bit challenging. We get some overlap here in these changing angles. Let's get a more neutral position on that thumb. Cool, that's looking a little better. Should I use reference? Probably. Am I using reference? No, because I'm being stupid. But that's how the class works. Sometimes I want to make stuff up. Cool. So notice how I did this, right? I'm just using those simple shapes, the simple Z shapes for the fingers. You can, in this case, I'm thinking about the fingers as, you guessed it, I'm thinking of them as planes. That are rotated in towards the palm. Okay, now let's just outline the shape of the fist. Okay, so our knuckles are here on the underside. And when the hand curls up, we're going to see that knuckle as the silhouette. Right, and now when the hand curves up into a fist, we're going to see the front plane of those fingers and a little bit of the top plane. About time for break. Don't worry. Let's just do this little demo. Vital Ash rushing to get out of here. He's like, I hate your class. You're so obsessed with boxes. This guy can't get enough of boxes. Even in the fist, we're going to want to have the fingers be somewhat staggered. So I'm going to stagger the index finger and have it come up a little bit from the remainder of that box. And again, everything's curving in towards the center. It's not the best, but it's a good rough pass for now. Let me So if I add in the shadow here, you're going to notice that the index finger is kind of staggered compared to the rest of them. And the shape I'm using for these knuckles, or the gap between the fingers, especially when you have the hand squished into a fist, I use a sort of diagonal line and then a curved line for the length of the finger, and then a flat plane for that. I've seen a lot of artists do that, and I think it looks cool. But that curving out and then back in is really interesting. Okay, I hope my computer doesn't die when we go on break. That would really suck. So a few things here. stagger the fingers to make the gestures feel feel natural, right? Don't ever put the gesture of the fingers where they're all the same. It's gonna make the gesture feel really stiff. Unfortunately, there is a little perspective when it comes to rotating those, right? So I'm using these different rotated boxes to kind of get a sense of where each of the fingers is going to be in space. If that's too confusing, take a photo. Try to use photos, sketch loosely from reference. Let's get the shape design on that second wrist because it's better. Cool. And then I guess the last bit, as far as the overlapping lines go, remember the line when we're looking at the backside of the fingers, we have the finger going into the palm and then that skin is underneath. So here we're seeing the fingernail. It's the opposite when we're looking at the underside of the finger. I guess just in this case. Yeah, so just make sure you're staggering that. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyway, let's take a break. We'll get back to it. We'll talk a little bit more about drawing hands, and then we'll talk about drawing feet because we didn't really get to that. All right, I'll probably be back early from the break, so if you all have questions, you can ask me during the break. All right, but I will be right back. Okay, I'm gonna be really quiet because last time I showed up and you guys got scared. So I'm back. I'm gonna raise the volume of my voice now. It still scared you?
Shit, I still got scared.
Sorry, I tried to do it. I tried to do it nice and calmly, but I couldn't,
Feel like it was even scarier.
Yeah, it did come off a little creepy. I apologize. It just sounded creepy. Oh, dang. Well, sometimes that happens.
You need like a doorbell sound for every time you come in, like a little quiet ding, and you're entering.
I agree. All right, let's do a couple more sketches. I want to do some more sketches where the fingers are turned towards the camera. And, this is our last lecture session. So we're going to do a little bit of leg stuff. And then I want you guys to, anything that's like sticking out is really confusing to y'all, please let me know. I definitely want to cover some of that stuff. Also, why are we doing Linkin Park in the chat? What's going on here?
It was because of the break. Someone was like,
Oh,
I'm about to break.
goddamn. Rest in peace, Chester Bennington.
Mhm.
All right, so I'm going to pull up some cool style reference, and I want to break down their shape choices. Talk about that. Just general shape designs for fingers coming into the camera is difficult. I agree. It is definitely probably the most challenging thing. Let me pull up some Yo Yoshinari. He's the bomb. Yeah, there was one thing before my computer exploded, I had the reference open, but then fortunately things got out of whack. Anyway, quick question. The amount of lines you use for the hands is based off artist reference as per usual? Yeah, I think with everything, it's a lot of, I would say it's two factors. It's learning, where, how to simplify it, looking at different artists for reference, like all the styles that I'm into. I love these, still Yo Yoshinari, but he's very sparing with the lines used in the hand, but you can kind of see, like here, we're seeing that line of the tendon and then this meatier bit, that dorsal interosseous muscle there. But still, a lot of these shape choices, or a lot of the line choices, are very sparing. There are situations where we have close-ups. Even something like this starts to get a little bit more detail, and we're getting some hatching in between there. But you'll notice when we've got full figure animations, that it's really, we're boiling things down to shape a lot of the time. Right. So I mean, this is literally just chock full of hands. It's like the best hand reference ever. But, let's take a look at that one all the way on the right here. Right, we can use our knowledge of forms and perspective and still, take inspiration from other artists. We don't want to just forget about that as a component, right? Great artists simplify their details. I love the way he just simplifies it. I mean, honestly, that thing I was talking about where I'm boiling the fingers down into the Z shape, I just got that from Yo Yoshinari. Seems like most anime artists are doing that kind of thing. There's many different styles of doing it. I want to pull up actually, we'll look at a classical reference for a little bit. Look at us being classical artists. There's one one drawing by John Singer Sargent that just absolutely, I love it. The way he breaks down the hands. I don't know if this is it or not. But either way, we kind of see the same thing happening where, yes, we're getting a little bit more detail, but mostly it's in, you know, spending a little bit more time rendering out some of the more minor things. But I think you'll notice with most artists, the way they're treating the fingers is wherever we're getting that shift in, wherever the finger is turning away, we'll just block that as a plane in shadow. Something he's doing there, right? He's adding a little bit more detail, but he's at the knuckle portion of the finger. He's indicating more. He's using like a more diamond shape to show the knuckle, and then it gets a little bit rounder down towards the bottom. But the same concept is kind of the same. It's just finding those planes, blocking them into shadow. It's kind of funny the amount of overlap even between classical art and anime or anything like that. The concepts here are all the same. It's just find shapes that you like, use lighting to indicate plane shifts. The shape design here is actually very similar. Yeah, and we can see here we got this. This is kind of a good one because we see the overlap of the fingers, and then underneath we get that hypothenar eminence. So our line work is fingers overlapping into the palm, hypothenar, and then the wrist underneath. All right, and one of the main concepts I've been sort of trying to get us all to do throughout the class is not be afraid when forms overlap and go inside the silhouette, right? If we have this as the mass of the hand, allow that to overlap the rest of the wrist. Super duper useful. Yeah, and when you're working on drawing figures, I'd highly suggest first just blocking in shapes for your characters, right? Don't try to overdo it, right? If you have your character and you're drawing a full figure, start with a cool shape. And then rather than thinking, overthinking the form, let's just block in a nice gesture for that. Okay, James said that at the wrist, right, the palm, we have that Z that happens, right? We have wrist, and then the palm goes down. So we want to make sure that that as we get to the wrist, now the hand is closer to the body on the thumb side there. The wrist is a giant Z finger with Z fingers attached to it. Exactly. Oops. Cool thing he's doing with the shapes there. So let's look at the line work there. So we've got this little thenar shape, right? That's that big portion of the thumb that's coming out from the wrist. And then the thumb itself is emerging out there. And then he kind of treats the fingers all as just one flat plane, but he adds indications between the fingers themselves, and so that helps sell that a little bit more. Let's look on the other side. Same sort of thing. We're going to get that dropping at the wrist, and we want an overlap of the hand into the wrist. And then look at those shapes that he's using for the fingers there. It's like just a flat plane with a little bit of a curve to it. And like I said, when you're starting and you're drawing your figures, just block it out with a general shape. All right. I think Romy asked about, he said fingers coming at the camera. Like this kind of situation. All right, let's talk about that. So as with anything with foreshortening, it gets very challenging, obviously, because now you've got to get comfortable with things overlapping. So I'm going to first draw it in side view, and I'm going to use my simplified model of it just to make things easier. So this is sort of how I'm breaking the finger down into volumes, or into shapes rather. I'm going to treat these as two separate forms. And so when there's overlap, I'm going to imagine A overlapping most of the length of B, right? And when, again, imagine this is a cylinder, it's turned at its side. The more we turn it towards us, we're seeing less and less of the length of it, and it becomes more circular. So let's take a look at just the shape of A, for example, right? When that's turned in side view, it looks like this. But when I turn it in a front view, I'm seeing the flat portion here where the fingernail is, and then the knuckle up above. All right, does that make sense? I'm sort of drawing it where I have the shape, and then I'm putting a line in the middle to indicate that dip there. Cool. Now the length of the volume of the finger, or sorry, the rest of the finger is going to be overlapped. And for that, it's not going to be 100% foreshortened, right? We're still going to see a little bit of that volume, but it's going to wrap around and behind this. So let me use a different color so it stands out. Right, a majority of the length of that is getting obscured by the front of the finger. Okay, so with all that in mind, we've got the palm facing like this. Here's the basic form. Let's say that's step one. Now I'm going to curve this. Add a little bit more nuance to the shape. And now I'm combining it with this concept we just talked about up here. So let's draw that all out. Oh no, come back. Usually I'll start with the fingertips in a situation like this because I find it a little bit helpful. And a lot of times I'll do that with anything that's foreshortening. Okay, I don't exactly like pinky. Oh, another thing I should mention is that if you look at the Yo Yoshinari drawings of the fingers, he tends to have the overall shape of them kind of taper towards the fingertip. So the overall gesture is this shape that just kind of tapers to a smaller tip. So I'm gonna incorporate a little bit of that, a little more of that shape design.
James, what's the difference between stylization and shape design?
It's kind of the same thing. Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily a difference there. Shape design is like what you're using to stylize. I would say shape design is one component of stylization. Another component might be, you know, how you indicate your lines, how you render things. All that is part of stylization, but shape design is like how you're tweaking, like the silhouette shapes, that kind of thing. Changes that you're making to the silhouette.
And what's the difference between shape language and shape design?
I don't know. I wonder if there is a difference. Shape language might be like, I'm trying to think, might just be like if you had, say you were making a species in a game or something, they would have a similar shape language. So the Zerg is what comes to my mind from StarCraft. Their shapes are all very triangular and spiky. So their shape language is that. But their shape design is triangular. So I don't know if it's, I don't know if that's like the best distinction, but that's kind of how I break that down. I wouldn't worry about it though. Don't, you know, it's, as long as you make cool looking shapes, people will be happy. They don't care about the semantics of things. Cool. Let's do a couple more of these. As far as the overlaps go, we've got a few avenues that we can use. So I will tend to indicate some overlap here between the skin on the thenar eminence here and the thumb. We can chop up this line on the bottom of the palm. And I'm indicating, so first I'm indicating lines of the tendons that go into the carpal tunnel. And then I'm indicating the full length of the wrist, or the full volume of the wrist. Right? So it's not just a singular line. And that's just the way I'm going about it. Everybody has their own particular style. Let's get these out of the way. Another way you can start with these is use some gestures. So if you want to scribble this in here, let's start with a scribbly version of this. Again, don't forget all the stuff we learned from figure drawing. We still want to scribble, still want to be loose, right? Especially when animating. Keep that loose. You don't need to have it all done in the first line. Screenless tablets. Get out of here with your screenless tablets. Just get a pen and paper. Get a pen and paper. Scan your lines. Those whack-ass screenless tablets. They're not good. You know they're not good. My hand would block the paper. Who cares? Okay. Is there a lot of room for pushing the hands gestures as well? I'm sure you could definitely push the gestures a lot. I play around with things like I wasn't doing so much pushing of the gestures here, but I like particularly on, let me find the one where like here, I was trying to stretch out the fingers a bit more than they, than they might be. You could, stretch them out kind of to some extent, but I don't think it's as pronounced as when you're doing a full figure or something like that.
Yeah, I think when you use that zigzag shape for the fingers, like the zigzag shape alone is actually the way I see it is just already pushing the gesture.
That's kind of how I thought about it,
So
personally speaking.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about legs. Let me get some figure reference. We'll talk about legs, and yeah, we can get that out of the way. Because we didn't really cover all that much about legs, and I know that was a sore spot for everybody. I thought we skipped leg day. We did kind of skip leg day. I apologize about that. But we're making up for it here. We're making up for it. All right, just give me one moment. Pulling up a little bit of reference. All right. So let's draw a little rough sketch of some legs and point out a few things. I think the big thing that occurred to me with looking at everybody's leg drawings, or one of the things that occurred, was we lost, a lot of times we would lose the gesture when we were designing things. So let me point out a few elements of the gesture that I think are important. The main thing for me with feet is we want to make sure our figures are grounded in 3D space. And overall, I think it's useful to think about that primary shape of the leg as it goes large to small down towards the ankle. So even if you're going to stylize within that, a lot of times I noticed people's shape design would go in and then be just as wide at the calf, which I don't take that as gospel. There are people that will make that work, but for me personally, I think it's a little more interesting to make sure that this shape tapers all the way down. And then one more element about that gesture, which is also going to apply to Z shapes. So it's very fitting that we talked about fingers and hands today, is the Z shape that occurs when drawing legs. Super duper important. Okay, one of the things that I love about drawing leg is I am doing these Z shapes all over, right? Here, 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 and then out again, right? It's just a bunch of Z's. It makes that gesture super duper interesting. When your legs are in a neutral position, they're kind of angled in a little bit. Like in a neutral, purely neutral state, your legs are going to angle in towards the center. But overall, there's still this Z shape, right? So from our hip bones, which I'm going to draw here in blue, our femur goes out. That's that greater trochanter of the femur. Don't worry about it. In, out, in, and then out again. Right, so that's that overall gesture of the leg. And I try to have my shape designs reflect that, right? And just like we were talking about with the forearm, once we get to an area like the ankle, we can use a shape that's rounder slash meatier up top and then gets a bit sharper and bonier down towards the ankle or the wrist. I just did it in two different ways here, where on the first one, I just kind of smoothed that out. And in this one, I really, really accentuated the ankle shape. Another way to think about this form, which I think is pretty useful, is at the ankle, you can almost imagine it like a little wrench shape. And then the form of the foot sockets right into that. So I found this to be a pretty useful looking tool to figure out the overlaps. Jonathan says, wow, there we go. That's what we like to hear, right? So what does this represent? Well, this portion are the ankle bones, the malleolus, if you're a nerd. Like I keep calling everybody a nerd when I'm the biggest fucking nerd that also knows the names. Sorry. Because I'm definitely projecting. I have to take all the bullying that I get from my YouTube channel and I've got to project it out to you guys. Anyway, he's been bullying himself this whole time. There you go. Anyway, but these forms help with that overlap. So you can, in a more simple way, I have the indications of the ankle. The heel is behind that. And then the top portion of the foot is overlapping those ankle bones. Now, I don't always really, really accentuate the ankle bones like that. Maybe I'll just do it on, like I kind of shifted more into a side view here. So maybe I'll just indicate that a little bit. Right, but this form for the ankle is what's giving me the knowledge that I've got to put that or some form of some line there in the center. Cool. So what do we have here? We've got Z shapes that angle in and then overlapping lines of the ankles and the feet, right? That this intersection of these forms is going to help this feel very sturdy, right? Like even though this doesn't exactly look like a foot, it feels like something that could stand upright because that form makes sense, Feels like something that has balance to it. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the feet and feet shapes, because that's something that I saw a lot of issues with throughout the class. And I want you to imagine the feet as like a little door stopper, right? Imagine you've got a little door stopper that's going underneath. Door stoppers are great. They keep balance, they keep the door closed or open, whatever you want. And in the case of feet, they keep your body upright. Okay, super duper basic primitive. You can just imagine, you can imagine it's a cube and then you just took out a little triangle out of it. We're back to cubes again. Just when you thought we were done with them, we're back. So part of what I saw happening when everybody was drawing is their shapes wouldn't reflect the perspective that their characters were in. So for example, if we have a low camera, meaning the ground is super duper flat, that ground plane is really flat, it wouldn't make sense to draw the foot where I'm seeing the top plane unless the foot is standing on its toes, right? If this is my horizon line and I draw the feet like this, that means the character is standing on their toes. However, if I use those same feet where we're seeing the top plane and then I do this platform, well, now we've got a completely different situation where the camera is above looking down. Right? So understanding this form and how it fits on the platform is crucial to placing your characters firmly planted in perspective. So we'll draw this wedge shape just at 3 different angles. So we'll do, our camera first is going to be at eye level. So our camera is at our eye, and if our camera is at our eye level, that means the feet are below the horizon line. So they probably look something like this. Let me get these out of here for a second. We'll draw a little platform. Might look something like this. So we're seeing the top and side planes, but it's not like when the camera is fully above where we're only seeing the top planes. So now let's do bird's eye view. That's not how you spell eye. Bird's eye view. So the camera is really, really high above looking down. Notice these lines on that platform are super parallel. We're seeing mostly the top. And then if we do worm's eye view, that platform is super tiny, and we're just seeing side planes. Right, so in this, at the eye level, we can see the top plane of the foot, side plane of the foot, and that really helps plant that on the ground. In the bird's eye situation, now we're seeing the top plane, but we're really only seeing just a small sliver of the side. And then on the worm's eye view, we're just seeing the front and side planes. We're not seeing any of the top plane. So the mistake I saw a bunch is, people would draw shapes that might look like a worm's eye view of the foot or a bird's eye view of the foot when we're at eye level, and that would completely fuck up the character being planted in space. So that's something you want to be really cognizant about. So be aware of that. Don't hear enough about the worm's eye. Well, guess what? We'll talk a lot about that. We'll do some more. We got 30 minutes left, so we will discuss our worm's eye view. Cool. I'm gonna do the barest bones of anatomy. Barest bones of anatomy. Finally, feed pics. Now we're going to look at muscles in the leg. Okay, another thing that came up a lot, particularly with you, RJ. I'm sorry to call you out like that, but I just have to do it. Got to do it, which is totally understandable. We didn't. It's mostly just because I was, paying special attention to your work, and we didn't really talk about the bony anatomy of the leg or hip at all. But the hip is divided. We've got these big wings of the hip. Those are the ala, or the wings. I don't know why they're called that. And then there's this pubic region, pubis, where the two halves of the hip bones fuse together. And the legs have muscles that attach to those that pull them towards the center. So there's a little bit of a gap there between them. I'm kind of exaggerating it for the point of this demonstration. But when I think about the muscular anatomy here, the big thing, there's really just a few groups that I group it into. So we've got a triangular shape of what's known as adductor muscles right on the interior part of the leg. Those help bring the leg in. They bring it close back to the body. So you can imagine if you have your leg out to the side, like you're doing a kick line thing, the adductor muscle is going to flex and bring that back to center. Yeah, I'm doing it now, RJ. Okay, then we've got our quadriceps muscle, muscles, it's a multitude of muscles that take up a majority of the front of the leg. Now, I want you to remember anytime there's muscles, what are the point of them? The point of the muscles is to move joints and bones in the body. So if we've got a muscle that attaches to the hip, down here at the lower leg, what is that doing? It's at the front of your leg, it's flexing. It's essentially doing the same thing as the tricep. It's keeping the leg extended. Cool. So that's a really, really simple version of that. There's one other muscle that we'll address here on the upper leg, from the front view at least. That's going to be little muscle here that kind of sidewinds its way up from the hip all the way down to the knee, called sartorius. Why do I bring it up? Because we see it on the surface anatomy. And when we see things on the surface anatomy, that's when they become relevant to drawing, in my opinion. So if we're looking at our shapes, what have we got? Let's take the outer shape of the leg. We're going to have an overlap here between the adductor muscles and that sartorius. And then that sartorius muscle is going to go down and wrap around the knee. So we've got our kneecap, and then sartorius is here on the inside, rounding that out. Then this whole shape is going to go down into the lower leg because the tendons of those muscles will overlap and go into the silhouette. And then we get the gastrocnemius muscle on the back, but we'll get there. So big overlap here is just between this triangular shape of the adductors and the sartorius muscle and the quadriceps there. So it's a really, you could even just break it down into these two shapes. Right? Our goal here is to keep that simple. You can just get your outer leg shape, your upper leg shape, and then if the character is somewhat muscular, add a subtle overlap there, indicating that distinction. Look at reference of people that are super muscular if you want to get like a really one piece jacked type character. And then continuing with these functions, have tendons from the upper leg overlap the lower leg. Right, that overlap is going to help show the function. And I have one more area overlap where that sartorius comes down and overlaps the lower leg. I'm trying to exaggerate it a little bit just so you guys can see it. And why am I bringing the leg up to a peak like this? It's because it reaches its widest point here where the femur sticks out, and then it angles up to the wing of your hip bone. So another little Z shape.
James, is that above the crotch, that, or is it on the level of the crotch, or is it different?
This is where the cock and balls goes. Here's your belly button.
Sorry, James, that femur, is that above? Because I see two different
It's
sections.
about in it's about in line with it.
Oh, it's about in line, but about
Yeah.
above.
Yeah. So I'm looking at my, yeah, it's about in line.
Okay.
I'm sure you just, yeah, you can look at some figure reference as well and you can find that out, but I'm pretty sure it's just about in line with the pubis there.
Thank you.
All right. What else? Let's see. Okay, so some key overlaps there. Now let's have a look at the lower leg. I'm just going to start with our shape and then we'll break down what's going on. So I'm just starting with the silhouette and then I'll talk about what's happening. Okay, so we've got our tibia and fibula, which I am simplifying into just one line there in the center of the leg. Again, that's angled down in towards the center of the body. The gesture is to move towards the center, right? The legs angle down in towards the center. In the neutral state, they do that. From the front view, you can see this big muscle called gastrocnemius on the back. And really the big overlap is just the knee bones and the lower leg bones and that muscle on the back. There are some other details, but I don't even, we can look at some Bridgman stuff if you want to go super in depth with the anatomy, but basically that sartorius muscle, it's continuous with the tibia, and so I'm going to allow that to overlap the lower leg. I'm going to pick up from behind it with the gastrocnemius muscle, and then towards the lower portion of the leg, now I'm going to have the tibia overlap again. Because all these, you're going to see this a lot where we've got a shape, it starts out muscular, and then at the latter portion of that limb, it becomes bony and tendinous. So you see this at the forearm, you see this at the lower leg. This kind of thing just happens all over the place. And if we're going to do that in 3D volumes, it kind of looks like this. So that's kind of what's happening there. A lot of times I'll just simplify things to shapes. You'll see this anatomy more pronounced on really muscular folks. So, if you want to go super in depth with the anatomy, have a look at that. Let's look at the back view. This poor man, he's just getting erased. Cool. Start with the hip bones again. Angle in, and now we're seeing the back, so we're going to see the heel. And we got a tailbone that we'll see there. So again, we're going to keep it simple just by capturing the outer shapes, and then we'll talk about the nuances of that in a second. Another Z shape that people either miss or you'll see professional artists really exaggerate is the Z shape that happens between the hip bone up here and this greater trochanter of the femur. See that exaggerated all the time. It's really cool when people do it well. A lot of times people will particularly exaggerate that in their female characters, but you can exaggerate it in the male figure as well. Still is there. The old hip dip, exactly. Cool. But yeah, it's still there in both figures. Cool. From this angle, what do we got? We've got ourselves a wonderful gluteus maximus, which kind of makes a little butterfly shape. All right. It's a nice monarch butterfly. What do I see happen a lot when people draw the anatomy? I think people tend to just round out the butt cheeks as if they're purely round. But just like all muscles, they have, they're a little bit more dynamic, especially on the male figure. We're going to see the butt might look more like this, where we see a little bit of this tendon. There's this Z shape that happens. And we get a little dip sometimes. That's not a great butt. I should look at the surface anatomy. But yeah, sometimes we'll get a little bit of a indentation there and this overlap. I pull up some butt reference. Do that better. So wholesome. Yeah, butts are just one big monarch butterfly. Hands ruined and butterflies too, all in one class. I'm so sorry. Sorry to do it to you. Okay. Yeah, so on the male butt, you're gonna get a little bit of that indication, that monarch butterfly indentation there. And when I'm drawing this surface anatomy, the butt cheek is gonna overlap, and then those same adductor muscles we were talking about before, that triangular shape, we're gonna see that going underneath there. So we're gonna see that under here. So we see that from both the front and the back view. Then we've got the hamstrings muscles. Which you could just imagine those as the biceps of the leg. I'll draw it on the surface anatomy one as well. Let's get these shapes in. So we've got our butt muscle. The adductor shapes there. Hamstrings. And those, like I said, are the bicep of the leg. So they're attaching at the hip, and they're also attaching to the tibia and fibula, and they're helping to bend the leg backwards. Biceps femoris, if you want to be a nerd. There we go. This guy's got it. This guy's got it. All right. And then gastrocnemius muscle is taking up a majority of the surface anatomy of the lower leg. This muscle. And so we get something kind of interesting, or you can at least see it in my the way I'm drawing this overlap. Right? I'm starting with the lower leg, and then I'm allowing the tendon from that lower leg muscle to overlap into the knee. All right, and the functionality of that, let me get rid of these. Get out of here, other legs. So that lower leg fits right in between those hamstrings muscles. Like that. So this is your hamstrings. That's your calf muscle. And so on the surface anatomy, how does that show up? I'm just letting this line overlap inside the upper leg. It's kind of funny how so much anatomy goes into dictating just like, it's just one line at the end of the day. It's like, cool, I learned all this anatomy so that I remember that that line overlaps the upper leg. So, you know, you can always simplify things a little bit too. And I think as long as you're keeping in mind what you're using this anatomy for, what the main purpose is, helps you not get too caught up in the weeds of anatomy, because it can be real easy. Especially if you look at something like Bridgman, it can be really easy to get caught away in a whirlwind of learning anatomy. Not to dissuade you from looking at that stuff. I do think it's helpful. I appreciated my time learning Bridgman's anatomy and whatnot. But I think as far as why we spent a little more time on doing the other stuff than going in depth with muscular anatomy, you know, I know in my experience, I've learned a lot more about drawing by being more gestural, loose, and just learning to draw our mannequins. But this will give your mannequins more fidelity. Anyway, guys, this is the last class. Just wanted to thank you all. This has been awesome. You guys are super badass. These classes have been going really well. Just all of them have been so much fun. Yeah, I'm really happy to have you guys as students. It's been super fun. For all of you that are going to be in part 2, get ready. We're going to be doing a lot of cool stuff. We're going to be doing lighting, clothing, all this stuff about finishing up your characters. Will be quite exciting. It's been sad, but it's been such a good ride. Well, we love to see it. Are we animating in part 2? We can do that. I've been, you know, I subtly introduced some animation here and there in this class, you know, just like animating a little bit. As far as doing things like slow in, slow outs, all that kind of stuff, I would have a look at the animation basics recordings if you want to go over that kind of stuff. All right, I'm going to end the recording. So thank you all.